He betrayed her with her friend, but a year later in the park, the Millionaire CEO saw her, with twins who looked just like him. The evening had begun like any other, and Sophia had no idea that in just a few minutes her life would split into two halves, before and after. She had agreed to meet a friend for dinner at a place she knew well, a cozy yet elegant restaurant in the heart of the city, where the dim lights reflected softly on polished wood and the waiters always greeted her with warm smiles. It was the same restaurant she had often visited with Daniel, the man she had once trusted with every piece of her heart, the man who had whispered dreams of forever while holding her hand across the very tables she now walked past. There was comfort in the familiarity of the setting, but also an undercurrent of unease, as though a shadow lingered in every corner. She shook it off, determined to enjoy a simple evening away from the stress of her own thoughts, but fate had different plans for her. She spotted him before he spotted her, and the sight nearly stole the breath from her lungs. Daniel sat at a corner table, his golden hair catching the soft glow of the chandelier above, his blue eyes focused not on business papers or his phone, but on the woman sitting across from him. Sophia's heart tightened painfully as she recognized the woman. It was no stranger, but her own friend, someone she had confided in, someone who had comforted her in times of doubt. Their heads leaned close together, his hand brushed over hers with an ease and intimacy that left no room for misinterpretation. It wasn't just business, it wasn't just coincidence, it was betrayal painted in the most vivid strokes. Sophia felt her legs weaken, her knees trembling under the weight of what she was seeing. For a brief moment, anger welled up, sharp and hot, urging her to march over, demand explanations, expose both of them in front of the glittering crowd of diners. Yet just as quickly, the anger turned into something heavier, something colder, a quiet devastation that sank into her bones. She realized in that instant that no confrontation would heal what had just shattered inside her. He had chosen someone else, and worse, he had chosen her friend. The humiliation was too great, the wound too raw to allow herself to stand there another second. Without a word, she turned and walked away, each step feeling both impossibly heavy and painfully light, as though she were floating outside her own body. She exited the restaurant into the cool night air, the sounds of clinking glasses and muted conversations fading behind her like a world she no longer belonged to. The city lights blurred as tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall until she was safely away from curious stares. She wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to hold together the pieces of her breaking heart, whispering silently into the darkness that she would never allow him the chance to destroy her again. What Daniel did not know, what neither he nor her so-called friend could ever have guessed, was that Sophia carried within her a truth that would one day turn their world upside down. She was pregnant, and the child growing inside her was his. Even as she walked away, crushed by betrayal, she knew her life was no longer just her own. She was not only a woman who had been deceived, she was a mother-to-be, and that realization gave her the strength to keep moving forward, even as her soul ached with loss. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest Sophia had ever known, not only because she carried the heavy secret of her pregnancy but also because she carried it alone. She could not bring herself to tell anyone, not her family, not the friends she still had left, and certainly not Daniel. The memory of his betrayal was still so raw that it colored every thought she had of him, and the idea of facing his cold dismissal or his smug denial again was unbearable. He had already proven that he could turn his back on her without hesitation, and she refused to give him another chance to wound her. So she made the choice that would change her life forever. She would keep the child a secret and raise it on her own. At first the decision terrified her. She lay awake at night staring at the ceiling, one hand over her stomach, wondering how she would manage. Questions circled endlessly in her mind. How could she afford it? How could she balance work and motherhood? How could she protect an innocent life from the shadow of a man who had already chosen not to believe in them? Yet beneath the fear was a quiet flame, a kind of stubborn courage that grew stronger with each passing day. This child would be hers, and hers alone, and no matter what she had to sacrifice, she would make sure it never felt unloved. Sophia worked long hours to save money, cutting back on everything unnecessary. She moved to a smaller apartment, one that felt cramped compared to what she had once shared with Daniel, but it was hers, safe and quiet. She painted the walls herself, filling the space with soft colors and warm touches, preparing a corner that would one day belong to her child. Every little step, from folding baby clothes to reading parenting books late into the night, became a way of building not just a home but also a new version of herself. Her body changed as the months passed, and with it came a strange mixture of vulnerability and strength. There were mornings when nausea left her weak and trembling, and there were nights when exhaustion pressed down on her like a weight too heavy to bear. But there were also moments of indescribable wonder, the first flutter of movement inside her belly, the steady rhythm of a heartbeat she heard in the doctor's office, the realization that she was never truly alone. These moments reminded her why she had chosen this path, why she endured the loneliness and the whispered judgment of those who didn't know her story. She avoided places where she might run into Daniel or the woman he had chosen. She constructed a new life in quiet corners of the city, surrounding herself with people who asked no questions and accepted her as she was. And when the time finally came, when the pain of labor gave way to the piercing cries of two newborn boys, she knew that every sacrifice, every lonely night, every tear shed in silence had been worth it. Jaden and Jacob, with their fair hair and bright blue eyes, were living proof of a love she once had and a strength she never knew she carried. Holding them for the first time, she felt both a surge of fierce protection and a swell of grief. They were perfect, they were everything, and yet they were a constant reminder of the man who had denied them before they were even born. She kissed their tiny foreheads, promising that they would never feel the emptiness she carried in her heart, promising that no matter what, they would know love. In that quiet, tear-streaked moment in the hospital, Sophia realized that her life had been split into two parts again, before the twins and that the after, however difficult, was where she would begin to rebuild herself. Daniel's world moved forward as though nothing had changed, though in truth there were cracks forming in places he had not yet noticed. His business empire was thriving, every quarterly report shining with numbers that impressed shareholders and competitors alike. The press lauded him as a visionary, the kind of man who could take risks and turn them into gold, and his carefully cultivated image as the perfect CEO remained intact. Yet even as he sat in boardrooms and signed contracts worth millions, there were moments when he would pause and wonder why victory felt hollow. He told himself that the emptiness came from exhaustion, from long hours and constant pressure, but deep inside he sensed that something more was missing. At night he returned to the penthouse apartment that overlooked the glittering city, a place that should have felt like the pinnacle of success, but he often found the silence unbearable. His companion, the woman Sophia had once called a friend, was everything society expected of a man like him: beautiful, charming, polished, someone who knew how to smile on red carpets and whisper sweet words at cocktail parties. Yet she lacked the warmth that once drew him to Sophia, the unspoken bond that made him believe in love instead of convenience. Sometimes he would look across the table at her and realize that he could not remember the last time he had laughed with her the way he used to with Sophia. Meanwhile, across the city, Sophia was living an entirely different life, one he knew nothing about. Her days were filled with the cries and laughter of two little boys who needed her every moment. The exhaustion of raising twins was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Nights blurred into days, with bottles to prepare, diapers to change, and tiny bodies that refused to sleep unless they were cradled against her chest. Her own needs disappeared into the background, meals were skipped, sleep was rare, and solitude was impossible. Yet amid the chaos, Sophia discovered a strength she never believed she possessed. When Jaden reached out his tiny hand for the first time, or when Jacob's eyes followed her across the room, she felt a fierce love so profound it eclipsed every sacrifice. There were hard days when she questioned how much longer she could endure. Bills piled up, the weight of responsibility pressed down, and loneliness sometimes felt like an endless winter. She would watch her boys sleeping, their fair lashes resting against cheeks that looked too much like his, and the ache of betrayal would return sharper than before. But then she would hear one of them stir, a soft cry breaking the silence, and she would remember that they were her purpose, her reason to fight through every hardship. Each smile they gave her became a reward, each small milestone a reminder that the life she had chosen, though difficult, was infinitely precious. Daniel, though oblivious to the existence of his sons, could not escape the ghost of Sophia. She lingered in his memory like a shadow he could never outrun. In meetings, he would catch himself staring at nothing, recalling the way she used to tilt her head when she laughed or the way her eyes seemed to see straight through him. He told himself it was foolish to dwell on the past, that she had left because she wasn't strong enough for the life he lived. But when he closed his eyes at night, her face returned, and no amount of wealth or success could silence the nagging voice that asked if he had made the gravest mistake of his life. Two parallel lives unfolded, worlds apart yet bound by invisible threads. One was gilded, full of power and recognition but empty at its core. The other was humble, marked by sacrifice and struggle but filled with love so strong it gave meaning to every moment. Neither Daniel nor Sophia knew that fate was already working quietly, preparing the moment when these two paths would collide again, and when the truth that had been hidden for so long would rise to the surface in a way that neither of them could ignore. By the time the boys had turned one, Sophia had learned to live with the rhythm of chaos and joy that filled her small apartment. The exhaustion was still there, etched into the lines beneath her eyes and the constant ache in her shoulders, but it was balanced by a deeper sense of purpose that carried her through each day. Jaden and Jacob were no longer fragile newborns but spirited toddlers who filled every corner of the home with laughter, mischief, and the kind of boundless energy that left her breathless. They were alike in so many ways, two mirrors of their father with their blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, but even at their young age, Sophia could see differences emerging in their personalities. Jaden was bold and adventurous, the first to crawl, the first to pull himself up on shaky legs, while Jacob was quieter, thoughtful, and prone to sitting back and watching before he made his move. She found herself marveling at them both, feeling as if her heart expanded each time she discovered something new about them. Her routine revolved entirely around the boys. Morning feedings, messy breakfasts that left the kitchen splattered with oatmeal, afternoons spent at the park where the boys' laughter rang out as they toddled across the grass, evenings of bath time struggles and lullabies. It was not glamorous, not the kind of life she had once imagined for herself when she stood beside Daniel in cocktail attire at glittering events, but it was real and full of love. On the hardest days, when loneliness crept in like a shadow, she would remind herself that these boys needed her more than she needed anyone else. They were her anchor, her compass, and her redemption all at once. As for Daniel, life remained polished and pristine on the surface, but cracks widened behind closed doors. His relationship with the woman who had replaced Sophia was beginning to unravel. Arguments flared more often, sparked by trivial things but underpinned by something deeper, the absence of genuine affection. He found himself distracted, unable to give her the attention she demanded, his mind too often wandering back to the woman he had cast aside. Sometimes he would catch himself staring out the window of his office, wondering what had become of Sophia, whether she had moved on, whether she thought of him at all. He never allowed himself to dwell too long, but the questions gnawed at him in moments of quiet. Fate began its quiet work in the most ordinary of ways. One afternoon, Sophia bundled the boys into their stroller and walked to the park near the center of the city. It was a rare sunny day, the kind that filled the benches with parents and children, the air buzzing with laughter and conversation. Sophia sat on the grass with the twins, letting them wobble between her hands as they practiced standing on their own. Their blue eyes sparkled in the sunlight, drawing smiles from strangers who passed by. She was unaware that at the same time, Daniel was leaving a nearby cafe after a business meeting, his mind clouded with the usual demands of his empire. He paused for a moment, distracted by the sound of children's laughter, and his gaze drifted toward the park. From across the street, his eyes locked on a scene that froze him in place. He saw Sophia, her brown hair loose around her shoulders, her face more mature but still carrying the quiet strength he remembered. Beside her were two small boys who looked so unmistakably like him that the world seemed to tilt. Their hair shone golden in the sun, their eyes were the same blue he saw in the mirror each morning, and in that instant something inside him cracked wide open. He stood rooted to the spot, unable to move, as 1,000 memories and questions surged at once. Could they be his? Was it possible that the woman he had pushed away had been carrying his children all along? Sophia, sensing the weight of a stare, looked up, and for the briefest moment their eyes met across the distance. Her heart stuttered, her body tensed, and without a second thought she scooped the boys into her arms and turned away, walking quickly toward the far side of the park. Daniel wanted to call out, to cross the street, to demand answers, but shock held him still. By the time he gathered himself, she was gone, leaving only the echo of children's laughter behind. He returned to his office that day, but nothing felt the same. The questions burned now, refusing to be silenced, and for the first time in years, the carefully ordered life he had built no longer seemed stable. Daniel could not shake the image of the park from his mind. The sight of Sophia with two boys who looked so much like him haunted him in the quiet hours, keeping him awake long after the city lights faded outside his penthouse windows. He replayed the moment over and over, recalling the curve of the children's faces, the way their blonde hair caught the sun, and most of all their eyes, so identical to his own that he felt as though he had been staring into a mirror of his past. It unsettled him deeply, unraveling the certainty he had once carried like armor. For the first time in years, his confidence faltered, and he began to wonder whether his cold dismissal of Sophia had cost him more than just love. Perhaps he had walked away from a family that had always been his. At first, he tried to focus on work, immersing himself in endless meetings and negotiations, but distraction gnawed at him. Whenever his assistant spoke, her words seemed muffled, and he caught himself scribbling absent-mindedly on notepads instead of signing contracts. His board members began to notice the shift in his attention, though none dared to question him directly. Even at night, when he attended exclusive galas or sat across from investors, he found himself scanning the crowd, searching for a familiar face he knew might not appear. The image of Sophia lifting one of the boys into her arms, her protective stance as she hurried away, replayed until it became unbearable. Sophia, meanwhile, felt the shock ripple through her entire body long after she had left the park. She clutched the boys tightly against her chest as she walked quickly through the streets, her mind spinning in panic. She had not expected to see him, not like this, not when she had finally carved out a fragile piece in her new life. She remembered the hardness in his voice when he had turned her away, the cruelty in his words, and the devastation of walking into motherhood alone. The thought of him discovering the truth terrified her. She was not prepared to let Daniel Pierce waltz back into their lives and disrupt the home she had built. Yet she could not deny that seeing him again had awakened something she had buried, a part of her that still ached when she thought of what they had once shared. Over the following weeks, their lives orbited closer without either of them intending it. Daniel began discreetly asking questions, making use of the resources at his disposal. He had built an empire on information, on uncovering hidden truths, and this search felt no different, though the stakes were far more personal. He discovered Sophia's address within days, learning that she lived in a modest neighborhood far removed from the circles of wealth and luxury he inhabited. He drove past once, his tinted windows concealing him as he watched her through the windshield. He saw her laughing with one of the boys on the porch, her hair messy and her clothes simple, yet she radiated a warmth that money could never buy. His chest tightened with longing and guilt as he realized how far her world was from his, and how he had been the one to create that distance. Sophia, sensing the unease of being watched though she did not know how close Daniel had come, doubled down on her resolve. She devoted herself even more fiercely to the boys, filling their days with love and stability so they would never feel the absence of a father. She told herself that she was enough, that they did not need him, and that inviting him back into their lives would risk reopening wounds that had only just begun to heal. Yet late at night, when the house was quiet and the twins lay sleeping, she would lie awake staring at the ceiling, the memory of Daniel's piercing blue eyes in the park chasing her into restless dreams. Their collision was inevitable. One evening, after a long day at the office, Daniel made the decision he had avoided for weeks. He parked his car near Sophia's street and walked toward her home with a determination that frightened even him. The sounds of children's laughter drifted out into the twilight, mingling with the scent of freshly cut grass, and as he approached the porch, he saw Sophia crouched down, helping one of the boys tie his shoes. His heart clenched at the tender scene, the intimacy of it, the simple beauty of a life he had denied himself. He stood there, frozen, until Sophia lifted her head and their eyes met. The world seemed to stop. She rose slowly, pulling her sons close as if shielding them from him, her expression a mixture of fear, anger, and something softer that she tried to hide. Daniel took a hesitant step forward, his throat tight, his words uncertain for perhaps the first time in his life. The boys looked at him with open curiosity, unaware of the storm between their parents, their blue eyes shining like two reflections of his own. In that moment, Daniel knew with absolute certainty what his heart had been whispering since the day in the park: they were his, and he had lost more than he could bear. Daniel stood there at the edge of Sophia's porch, his polished shoes planted on the wooden steps that felt entirely foreign compared to the marble floors he was used to walking on. He had spent years commanding rooms full of powerful men, silencing critics with the weight of his voice, and steering empires with a steady hand, yet in that moment he felt smaller than he ever had before. The sight of her standing tall, though visibly tense, with the boys held close at her sides, stripped him of every ounce of certainty he had once worn like armor. He had thought he could come here prepared, with words carefully rehearsed in his head, but as their eyes met he realized nothing he had practiced mattered. He saw in her gaze not just anger but the remnants of trust he had broken and love he had squandered, and it nearly brought him to his knees. Sophia's heart pounded so hard she thought it might crack through her ribs. For years she had imagined this moment, not because she wanted it, but because she feared it. She had feared the day Daniel Pierce would find his way back into their lives, and now here he was, standing on her porch with that same piercing look that once captivated her but now threatened to undo all the stability she had fought so hard to build. She straightened her back, pulling her sons closer, their small hands clutching at her fingers as if they could sense the shift in the air. She reminded herself that she was not the girl he had abandoned, but a mother who had carried, nurtured, and raised these boys on her own. She was no longer at his mercy, and yet her body betrayed her with the way it remembered him, the way her chest ached when she saw the guilt written across his face. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low and uneven, a sound that startled even him. He told her he had been wrong, that he had been blind and arrogant, that in his hunger for control and fear of vulnerability he had pushed her away without even considering what he was truly losing. He admitted that the sight of the boys had shattered him, that he could no longer hide from the truth he had denied, and that every day without them felt like a punishment he deserved. He confessed these things without the polish of a practiced speech, the words tumbling out with raw urgency, and for the first time in years he allowed himself to stand without his shield of pride. He told her he was sorry, though he knew an apology would never be enough. Sophia listened, her face unreadable as his words poured out, but inside her chest a storm raged. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to throw back every sleepless night, every bill she had struggled to pay, every lonely moment when she had wished he were there. She wanted him to feel the weight of the isolation he had condemned her to, the cruel echo of his dismissal when she had needed him most. Yet another part of her, one she despised for its weakness, longed to believe him, longed to accept that the man who had broken her might finally be capable of repair. The conflict twisted inside her until her throat burned with unshed tears. She told him he had no right to simply reappear and demand a place in their lives. She told him he could not walk into their home as if the years of silence had never existed. And she told him that her sons had a father, not by blood but by love, because she had played both roles and she had done it without him. The twins, unaware of the gravity of the moment, studied Daniel with wide eyes. One of them tilted his head curiously and asked Sophia softly who the man was, his little voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Daniel's chest ached as he heard his son's voice for the first time directed at him, though the boy did not yet know the truth. He crouched down instinctively, lowering himself to their level in a gesture that stripped him of the power he had always carried. He introduced himself with a voice that wavered, telling them his name as if he were meeting strangers when in reality he had always been bound to them. His hands trembled slightly, and for the first time in his life he felt what it meant to truly fear not of financial loss or failed deals but of never being allowed to belong to the very people who mattered most. Sophia's breath caught at the sight. For a fleeting second, she saw the man she had once loved, not the ruthless CEO who had abandoned her but the young man who had once held her hand beneath the stars and spoken about dreams instead of profits. She quickly crushed the thought, reminding herself that love had not been enough to keep him from breaking her heart before. She told him if he truly wanted to prove he had changed, it would take more than words. He would have to show consistency, patience, and humility, and she warned him that even then she might never fully forgive him. Daniel nodded, swallowing hard, accepting the weight of her conditions because he knew he had no other choice. For once in his life, he was not the one holding power, and strangely, it felt like a relief to surrender. As the evening sun dipped lower, casting golden light over the small porch, silence stretched between them, heavy with years of hurt but also carrying the faint possibility of something new. Daniel rose slowly, promising he would not disappear again, and asked if he might return, not as a father, not yet, but simply as someone who wanted to know the boys. Sophia hesitated, torn between slamming the door on him forever and allowing the smallest crack through which hope might slip. Against her own instinct, she gave a reluctant nod, not for him but for the children who deserved the truth, and Daniel felt the air leave his lungs as though he had just been granted a lifeline. Daniel returned the following week with a nervousness he had never known in business negotiations, his heart pounding harder than it ever had when signing contracts worth billions. He had spent the days in between replaying every moment from that night on Sophia's porch, every word she had spoken, every cautious look she had given him, and every second of hesitation before she had agreed to let him try. He arrived not in his expensive car or tailored suit, but in a simple shirt and jeans, something that felt almost like a disguise yet also strangely liberating, as though shedding the armor of his corporate life allowed him to walk more humbly into theirs. When Sophia opened the door, she regarded him with the same guarded expression, but she let him in, her silence a reminder that trust was not given but earned. Inside, the twins were sprawled on the floor with their toy cars, their laughter filling the small house with warmth that made Daniel's chest tighten. At first the boys stared at him with curiosity, whispering to each other in a language of shared secrets that only twins seemed to have. Daniel crouched to their level, remembering how alien the position had felt the first time but how important it was to meet them as equals, not as a towering figure looming over them. He pulled 2 small model planes from his bag, gifts he had chosen carefully after agonizing over whether they were too much or too little. The boys' eyes lit up as they reached for the toys, and Daniel felt a flicker of relief, though it quickly faded when one of them turned to Sophia and asked if it was okay to take them. That single glance, that instinct to seek their mother's permission, reminded Daniel of all the years he had missed, all the nights when Sophia had been their entire world without him. The afternoon unfolded awkwardly at first, Daniel fumbling with attempts to make conversation, asking them questions about their favorite colors and cartoons, his voice betraying how foreign it felt to engage with children who were his own flesh and blood yet strangers to him. The boys answered shyly, sometimes giggling, sometimes ignoring him completely as if testing how much effort he was willing to make. Sophia watched quietly, her arms crossed, neither helping him nor pushing him away, forcing him to navigate this fragile ground alone. Daniel realized quickly that winning them over would not come with grand gestures but with patience, consistency, and the ability to listen more than he spoke. He let them lead, following their games clumsily, crashing toy cars and making airplane noises that felt ridiculous on his tongue but drew hesitant smiles from the twins. When one of the boys grew frustrated because his tower of blocks kept falling, Daniel instinctively reached out to help, his large hand steadying the fragile structure. The boy hesitated, staring up at him with wide eyes, and Daniel froze, terrified he had overstepped. But then the child nodded, allowing him to place the final block, and together they watched the tower stand taller than before. Daniel felt a swell of pride he had never experienced in boardrooms or at company celebrations, a pride born not of accomplishment but of shared creation with his son. Sophia noticed the subtle change in his posture, the way his usually rigid shoulders softened as he leaned into the moment, and though she said nothing, something in her heart shifted ever so slightly. As the sun began to set, Sophia prepared dinner, the smell of roasted chicken filling the air, and Daniel offered to set the table. It was a simple task, one he had not done in years, but he performed it with deliberate care, arranging plates and utensils with the precision of someone handling delicate glass. The twins watched with fascination, as if seeing someone so powerful in their mother's stories perform ordinary actions felt almost magical. They asked if he would stay to eat, and Sophia hesitated before nodding, warning herself that it was not an invitation into their lives but a single evening to see what he would do. Dinner was messy and loud, with the boys spilling juice and interrupting with endless questions, and Daniel found himself laughing in ways he had not in years, laughter that startled him with how natural it felt. Later, when the boys grew sleepy and Sophia tucked them into bed, Daniel lingered in the hallway, listening as they begged for a story. Sophia began to read softly, her voice soothing, and Daniel closed his eyes, imagining how many nights he had missed this sound, how many times she had carried the weight alone. When she emerged, she found him standing there, his expression heavy with regret. He whispered that he knew words would never erase the pain he had caused, but he promised that this time he would show them with actions, even if it took the rest of his life. Sophia studied him in silence, her heart torn between anger that still simmered and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he meant it. That night as he left, Daniel felt lighter than he had in years, though the road ahead was still long and uncertain. He knew he had only taken the first small step, but he also knew he could not turn back now. He had looked into the eyes of his children, seen their hesitant trust, and he realized that no empire he had built, no wealth he had accumulated, could compare to the fragile gift he was being offered. It was not redemption yet, but it was the beginning of something far more valuable. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel began weaving himself into the rhythm of Sophia's world with deliberate persistence. He showed up at the park on Saturdays, carrying a thermos of coffee for Sophia and snacks for the boys, learning to push swings, catch them when they tumbled, and chase after them when their laughter carried them too far. At first, Sophia treated his presence as temporary, an experiment that would eventually collapse under the weight of his demanding empire. Yet to her surprise, he kept coming back, rain or shine, always on time, never with excuses. It was not the grand declarations that began to soften her but the quiet consistency of his actions, the way the twins started to expect him, running to the gate each weekend as though it were the most natural thing in the world. The true test arrived one crisp autumn evening when Daniel was scheduled to attend a high-profile gala, a place where his presence was not just expected but demanded. Investors, journalists, and competitors would all be there, waiting to measure his influence and reaffirm his power. Yet just hours before the event, Sophia called him in a rare moment of panic. Jaden had fallen ill suddenly, his fever spiking and his small body trembling, while Jacob clung to his brother in fear. Sophia admitted she didn't know if she should rush him to the hospital or wait it out, her voice trembling with exhaustion. For a brief moment, Daniel's old instincts surged, the voice that told him appearances mattered more than anything else, that his empire could not afford a dent in its image. But then he looked at the tuxedo hanging neatly on the rack and realized that for once in his life, his absence at a glittering ballroom would not matter nearly as much as his presence in a small, overheated bedroom where his son needed him. He cancelled his appearance, silencing his assistant's frantic protests, and drove across town without hesitation. When he arrived, Sophia's face was pale with worry, her hair disheveled from running her hands through it. The sight of Daniel dropping his suit jacket and kneeling by the bed, pressing a cool cloth to Jaden's forehead, was something she had never imagined. He stayed the entire night, holding his son when the fever made him restless, telling quiet stories until the boy drifted into uneasy sleep. Jacob nestled close, as if reassured by the steady presence of a father he was only beginning to trust. Sophia sat in the corner, watching with a mix of disbelief and reluctant admiration as the man she had once known as distant and cruel now leaned into vulnerability, his own eyes wet with fear for the small boy in his arms. By morning, the fever had broken, and Daniel's shirt was wrinkled, his eyes rimmed with red, but he had not moved once from their side. That night became a turning point. Sophia could no longer dismiss his presence as temporary or self-serving. She began to see that he was choosing them, again and again, in ways that cost him more than money ever could. The walls she had built around her heart cracked further, though fear still lingered, fear that he might falter, that the empire might one day lure him back to the cold man she had once known. Yet when he looked at her with exhaustion and relief, whispering that nothing in his life had ever mattered more than this, she believed him in a way she hadn't allowed herself to in years. As weeks passed, the changes deepened. Daniel brought the boys to his office, where instead of hiding them away from the polished world of corporate power, he introduced them proudly as his sons, watching with quiet satisfaction as their laughter echoed against walls once filled only with ambition. Colleagues and investors looked on in surprise, some even disapproval, but Daniel no longer cared. He had spent years building a kingdom of glass, but now he had something real, something unshakable. Sophia watched from a distance, her heart tugged between awe and fear, but the sight of her sons perched on their father's lap as he signed documents and showed them the city skyline filled her with a cautious hope she had never imagined feeling again. The final moment of clarity came one afternoon when the boys insisted they all go to the park together. As the twins played, Daniel and Sophia sat side by side on a bench, the air filled with the sound of their laughter. For a long time, neither spoke, the silence heavy but not uncomfortable. Then Daniel turned to her, his eyes softer than she had ever seen them, and admitted that he had been a coward all those years ago, too afraid to see that love and family were not burdens but gifts. He told her that he would spend the rest of his life proving to her and the boys that he was worthy of a place in their lives, not because he deserved forgiveness but because they were his only truth. Sophia felt the tears come unbidden, but she did not look away this time. Instead, she reached for his hand, and though it was small, tentative, it was the beginning of something neither of them had thought possible. The story that had begun in betrayal and heartbreak did not transform overnight into perfection, but in the quiet moments, shared dinners, bedtime stories read together, laughter echoing through the house, it became clear that the past no longer defined them. Daniel had found something far greater than freedom or empire. He had found the family he had once thrown away, and in choosing them over everything else, he discovered the man he had always been meant to be.